Hi there, Isha here, and welcome back to Higher Life TV, where we take concepts that are considered esoteric, spiritual, or new agey and show you how to turn them into practical tools that can greatly improve the quality of your life. And today we're going to talk about one of the most important tools or inner resources that every single human being on this planet has that can not only greatly reduce the amount of suffering that you have on a personal level, but radically reduce the amount of suffering that is occurring worldwide. And there has never been a more important time in history to have this capacity to reduce global suffering. And this is the inner resource of forgiveness. And forgiveness is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts floating around out there. First and foremost, many people believe that forgiveness is something you do for another person or you do for yourself by forgiving another person. It seems like it's something that you have to bestow or offer to a person who you perceive has wounded you in some kind of way. Now, I say perceive because there's lots of situations in our life where people have acted in a way towards us that we have experienced as a deep wounding, yet from that other person's perspective, it may have been done unintentionally. Now, of course, we have all experienced and heard about stories where people have intentionally harmed other people, and therefore that other person has been wounded by that person's behavior. And forgiveness will be an important part of the wounded person's recovery process. So these two experiences exist, unintentional wounding and intentional wounding, but both require the same kind of response in order to fully heal yourself and liberate yourself from the effects of that wounding. Now, at the Higher Life Academy, the primary focus of our education is personal transformation. And to go even deeper into that, it's a particular type of personal transformation called life alchemy. And life alchemy is really about transforming the lead in your life, transforming all those inner blocks that manifest out as outer blocks so that you can create gold, transform lead into gold so that you can generate from the difficult aspects of your life or the difficult experiences or the difficult conditions that you live within, gold or a wisdom or an insight that can help you live your life in a more prosperous and fulfilling way. Traditionally, life alchemy was considered to be turning actual lead into gold. But if you consider emotional repression as lead, as something that is weighing you down, not only emotionally, but energetically, even physically, can cause depression, can cause all sorts of mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional diseases. So this idea of repressing your emotions, of holding on to difficult experiences, of staying stuck in your wounding is a form of suffering, or how suffering is experienced in the human condition. And forgiveness really is our only way out of this kind of suffering. So forgiveness is first and foremost a deeply, deeply personal experience. It requires no other person to be involved. And this is probably the most important thing you need to understand when you decide to invite forgiveness into your life. So that's the second thing. You don't consciously go out and do forgiveness. The only way you can do forgiveness is through your mental experience of life. So you can mentally tell yourself that you're going to forgive someone, and your mind will spend a lot of time, and I'm sure all of us have been through this experience of arguing with yourself about why you should or shouldn't forgive a person. And that other person may not even be physically present, they may even be dead, but you can spend days, months, years in this discussion about whether you have what it takes to actually forgive a person. When it's happening all up in this mental sphere, you haven't even really begun the process of forgiveness. Okay? Forgiveness is in fact something that you need to experience. You cannot really fully understand what it is to forgive a person or to forgive yourself until you've actually passed through the entire process. You've experienced how forgiveness creates a sense of liberation inside your own being and inside the relationships that you have where this forgiveness has been required. You feel it, you know it because you've been through it. It's a lived experience. So how do we go about entering into this process so that we can experience forgiveness in our entire being and make it our way of life? Well, the first thing you need to do is to understand that forgiveness is about understanding. It's about a particular type of understanding called compassion. And I did talk about this in the video on compassion. It's about waking up one day and consciously seeking to understand the bigger context of the wounding that has occurred in which you think forgiveness is required, whether that's self-forgiveness or forgiveness of another. So you may be holding on to a wound that has happened that happened in childhood, and be holding on to anger, blame, some kind of regret or remorse about the way that your parents raised you that left a wound in you. And somehow you want to fix that. And often it is about either blaming your parents or thinking that you need to forgive them. So already you're looking at something that you need to do to the other, to your parents. You might seek out a conversation with them. You might go to a therapist. There's lots of different ways that you can begin this process of wanting to liberate yourself from the suffering around holding on to this wound that you perceive was created by your parents. So as soon as you enter into that process, you're seeking to understand. Now, many of us get stuck at that initial stage one. We seek to understand, but then we only want to understand what was done to us. We want to know, we want justification. We want it to be acknowledged that something happened that deeply wounded us, and that wounding still sits with us. And that can be cathartic at the beginning, but it's only an entry point. Because anyone who's done this work will understand that once you get through that initial recognition of what happened, which is certainly important, the initial anger and perhaps blaming process of holding your parents accountable for that wounding, you can hit a ceiling. You don't actually feel liberated, because even though all those things have been acknowledged, they're up here in the head. The contraction or the wounding is still playing out in a sense energetically in your body. So the next step is to understand the bigger picture. And let's, continue on the path of childhood wounding. Anybody who's done a bit more exploration or sought to bring a compassionate viewpoint to what happened to them in childhood will come to see that their parents have also been wounded in particular ways by their parents. That wounding is generational and or ancestral. It passes from generation to generation. So while your parents may not have meant to, they have wounded you simply through the limited awareness that their own wounding created in them. So you can see how, if it's passed on ancestrally, it can be very, very difficult to find the person or the starting point in which you can assign that blame so you can finally be liberated. That's not going to work. What you will realize at some point is that you're going to have to come back to your own experience of that wounding. The wounding has already happened. It is now a living experience inside your being, and it is affecting the way that you feel about yourself, the way you think about yourself, how you act, how you behave, what you think you're entitled to. It plays out in all sorts of ways. So seeking a compassionate viewpoint is seeking to understand that there is a root cause, and the root cause is wounding. The wounding is perpetuated through all human relationships, and the only way for you to liberate yourself from it is to liberate yourself from the wounding that exists inside you. So therefore you must detach from all the other distractions, all the people that you think created the wounding, the society. This plays out in a much larger stage, one would say, when we're talking about sexism or racism. There is a whole lineage to this kind of inequality and the behaviours that it brings about. So where do we begin the forgiveness process? We have to begin it in ourselves and how that is showing up in our own lives. So at the end of the day, it's always going to come back to your own inner world, your own inner wounding, your own inner experience of that inequality or that being a victim on one level or another. And while we might not like to admit it, it doesn't matter, in what position of privilege or ill privilege that you sit. We are all carrying this wounding. We are all needing to pass through this process of forgiveness. So once you enter into or decide or consciously choose that you're going to seek a more compassionate understanding of your own wounding, of the wounding of others that has caused your wounding, and of the greater collective wounding that is creating further wounding in all of the new humans that come onto this planet, you're not really going to be able to get to the depth that you require to fully understand how massive wounding is and how powerful and how pervasive, and that the only way through is to work in this microcosm that we are, to work with your own wounding. So how does forgiveness then follow on from compassion? Well, what you'll find is that through this process of seeking a more compassionate viewpoint, you will travel deeper and deeper and deeper. And as you travel deeper and deeper and deeper, your awareness will begin to expand. And in that expansion, you start to allow more space for your experiences, for your pains, for all the things that you've swallowed down or oppressed in you that are holding you back. And as you create more space, you become more whole. You become more of yourself. You become more comfortable. You're able to process emotions that you couldn't process before, and you become lighter and lighter. Each time you go through this process and you start to see that it is part of something bigger than the individual, that nobody did something to you that you don't have the power to liberate within yourself. You no longer feel imprisoned or trapped or held back by the actions of another. And this is what forgiveness really is about. It is freedom, emotional freedom. You are freeing up your emotions to be processed fully by the only person that can do that, which is you. It doesn't matter if you go back to your parents or to the friend or to your partner who's hurt you and ask for them, and ask for them to acknowledge what they've done. Even when they've done that, the wounding still sits in you. So you still will have to go through the process of tending to that stuck emotion, listening to what it's saying about you and the other person, feeling it in your body before you can be released from it. Now, we live in a world at the moment where we believe that the mental plane, that what we experience mentally is the only true reality. But the fact is that we have an energetic reality, and wounding sits in that energy reality. It is something that you'll never be able to liberate yourself from through the mental plane. You cannot think your way out of this. You cannot think forgiveness. You actually need to put yourself through the process of it, which can be, pretty challenging. I mean, I've been doing this work for years and I'm still knee deep in the process of forgiving myself and liberating myself from all the dysfunctional strategies that I have developed over my entire lifetime up until now to survive in the world the way it is. To be a woman in a world which is, very limited by a narrow masculine way of being. And I don't mean men, I mean masculine. I mean, we're all stuck in this tiny little experience of reality where we're all competing against each other. We're all in experience inequality from each other. We're all in this kind of rat race experience where we're trying to get to the next level of affluence or the next level of status, where we think that things are going to feel more relaxed and we're going to be finally free to feel okay in the world. And at the end of the day, if you're going to bottom line it, the only purpose of forgiveness is to feel okay. We all just want to be okay existing. And more than that, we want to wake up every day and be open to, to experiencing life from the deepest possible level of fulfillment. We want life to fulfill us. And the only way that we can be filled up by new opportunities, by new vitality, is if we free ourselves from all that contracted energy, all that anger and rage and pain that being a victim to another person, or being a victim to life, or being a victim to our gender or our social status or our skin color has created. We're all stuck in this dysfunctional system, which says, which is really a system of duality. For one skin color to be in power, the other one has to be not in power. We can just swap the skin colors around, but it's all this idea of, for one gender to be more powerful, the other one has to be less powerful. We're operating in contrast to each other, and we're all victims of it. It's interesting that many feminists fight for equality. It's a fight to get equality in a system that is clearly dysfunctional. Anyone has to ask themselves, why would you want to be equal in a system that inherently perpetuates wounding, inherently perpetuates violence and aggression? It's oppressive. We are all being oppressed by the same system. We're just playing a different part in it. And, if we woke up tomorrow and all those parts were swapped around, we'd all still act the same way, because it's not, at the end of the day, about our skin colour, our gender, our status. It's about a system that puts us into these different roles, instead of a system in which we are all free to be ourselves. We're all free to love. We're all free to process our emotions without judgment. We are all free to make choices for ourselves without us having to think how that will affect other people, and will other people let us be that person, or do we need, and this is something that comes from childhood, enmeshment, and most of the forgiveness that any of us will ever have to do is around enmeshment. It's around the wounding that happens in childhood, and prior to childhood, the ancestral wounding that each generation of parents carries over to their children. We all have to forgive our forefathers for what they, from what they passed on to us, but also from what they were ignorant to, because they didn't know. They didn't know that they needed to forgive themselves and others. They were just going along with life. But this generation, now in this time in history, we understand that something different needs to be done. We can no longer just keep focusing on more success, more progress. We really need to bring ourselves back into our whole being and focus on forgiveness, focus on the path of compassion, of seeking to understand how we ended up where we are today in this mess that we're in. We really need to go deeper, dive deeper into the circumstances and the conditions that have led to this very moment, but from a loving heart, to know that we did the best that we could. Sometimes we could have done better, but for whatever reason we weren't able to. And here we are. And now we need to look back and forgive ourselves and others. And we can only do this by processing our own emotional wounding and becoming our own loving parents. Now that might seem like a very esoteric lesson. So you may say, well, how's this going to help me in my everyday life? What's the actual tool here? Well, I'm going to keep it really simple. Wake up and invite forgiveness into your life, whether it's for yourself or for another person. Open yourself up to the idea that forgiveness will be a cathartic and liberating process, even if you have no idea what that involves. Read up about compassion. Become aware of how compassionate you are to yourself and to others, and seek to go that little bit further. Offer yourself and others 2% more compassion every day. If you feel angst or rage or anger towards another group of people for what you believe they're doing wrong or harmful in the world, perhaps seek to understand why they act that way. How did we get to this point without blame? And you will start to open up to an entirely different viewpoint, which is all about wisdom. Everything that we're going through is serving the collective wisdom of humanity. Every single time we address the lead in our collective experience of humanity and face up to it and explore it and discuss it and contemplate it, that's the most important thing. We come to a whole new awareness around it. And in that new awareness, we feel freer and lighter and more able to love. Because there will never be a time, or at least now, that I can foresee in the near future where we won't be potentially wounded by the actions of others. So if we know that wounding is something that we can take responsibility for and tend to and process on behalf of our own freedom and the freedom of the entire human species or the entire planet, this becomes a very, very powerful tool in our lives. So I really hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you haven't watched the previous 2 lessons on compassion and perfectionism, which is, one thing that forgiveness really will free us from, this perfectionism is all about an unforgiving mindset. and it's very prevalent in our society at the moment. I really suggest you go back and watch those and then watch this one afterwards. Now, if you're interested in life alchemy and transforming the lead in your life into gold and living in a much more powerful, prosperous and fulfilling way, I suggest you check out our free courses at Higher Life Academy, especially the one, the 4 Cornerstones on a Spiritually Driven Life, or you can just get in touch and we can have a chat about how I might be able to help you. So until next time, take care and love life.